According to the Missouri Digital Heritage, the Louisiana Purchase Exposition, commonly known as the St. Louis World's Fair of 1904, was the last great international exposition before World War I. The fair, built on a 1,200-acre site, included hundreds of thousands of objects, people, animals, displays, and publications from 62 exhibiting countries and 43 of the 45 states. The setting of world records, such as the largest organ, and working displays of every important technological advance were significant design goals. The fair was a combination of trade show, civic peace, a monument to culture, along with more than a tinge of American pride. The fan spared more than 7 months from April 30th to December 1st and was hosted at Washington University in St. Louis. Now you may be wondering at this point why I'm telling you about the St. Louis World's Fair of 1904. Well, it's because it also hosted the 1904 Summer Olympic Games, the first Olympics held in the United States. The sporting events were greatly overshadowed by the fair, though, due to high travel expenses, lack of European athletes attending, and the founder of the modern Olympics not attending either. U.S. athletes are said to have won 239 of the 280 total medals for all events combined, although that number has been disputed due to the fact that many American competitors were recent immigrants who had not yet been granted U.S. citizenship. But what you don't know is regardless of who won what awards, one event rose above all others in strangeness and in contention. Welcome to What You Don't Know About Sports, where we delve into the forgotten stories, teams, and athletes of sports history and question widely held takes on today's sports. I'm Blake, and this is Matt.
Hey.
And today we want to tell you the story of one of the most controversial and unforgettable sporting events in history, the 1904 Summer Olympics Marathon. This is the first episode of what will be an ongoing series about cheating in sports. And the 1904 Olympic Marathon was full of hilarity. A few examples include purposeful dehydration. That's a quote.
Pause.
That's a quote.
You're saying purposeful dehydration.
That is a quote.
The 1900s are a great time.
Yep.
The aughts.
A car ride to the finish line. Rat poison and brandy. Rotten apples. And many more.
This sounds like some kind of Lemony Snicket.
You're going to learn today.
Situation, yeah.
All right, so according to the Smithsonian Magazine, quote, from the start, the 1904 marathon was less a showstopper than sideshow, a freakish spectacle that seemed more in keeping with the carnival atmosphere of the fair than the reverential mood of the games. The outcome was so scandalous that the event was nearly abolished for good. So the race organizers thought that the outcome of this was so bad that they almost didn't let it happen 4 years later.
No more marathons.
No more marathons at the Olympics.
We clearly cannot operate as a marathon. This is not going to work.
No, this was almost the end of it. And disclaimer real quick, I'll probably be saying stuff like allegedly or it was reported that a lot because in 1904, the reporting of the games were lost in translation a little bit, could have been forgotten, could have been fictionalized to some degree. Because it was so long ago.
That's a difficult thing just in history, period, is newspapers from that era, like the mid-1800s through into World War I sometimes, especially if they weren't one of the big newspapers, would make up stuff and just write ridiculous
like
things.
Clickbait? Like
it's clickbait. Yeah, it's clickbait because they got to sell papers and
sure.
ridiculous headlines would sell papers. So it's hard to tell. It's hard to find primary sources that are newspapers that are legitimate
from that time period.
From that time period. It's strange.
That is interesting. So, to the details. Only 32 total runners participated, and only 14 completed the entire race.
Wow.
So, less than half of the total runners that started the race finished, ran the entire distance.
And there'll be more cars in the Indianapolis 500 than there were in an Olympic
100 years ago.
1904. Okay. All right.
So some of the runners included multiple experienced marathoners. Sam Mallour, who won the 1902 Boston Marathon. Arthur Newton, he finished 5th in Paris at the 1900 Olympic Marathon. John Lorden won Boston in 1903. Michael Spring, winner of Boston in 1904. And a gentleman by the name of Thomas Hicks, he finished 2nd in Boston in 1904. He was not a professional runner. He was a well-seasoned amateur runner. But by trade, he was a professional clown. He was a professional clown, his real job. Another important individual to this story is a gentleman by the name of Frederick Lors. He was a bricklayer by day, so he was also not a professional runner, and he could only train at night. And the way that he earned his spot was the Amateur Athletic Union, AAU, sponsored a, quote, special 5-mile race, and he placed in that to be able to... But he basically qualified for the Olympics by placing in a special 5-mile race, quote unquote.
So he qualified for a marathon. 22
Yes.
point.
Well, today it's 26.2.
26.2 by running a 5-mile event.
Apparently. Allegedly.
Allegedly.
We'll throw that word in there. Allegedly. Also included 10 Greeks who had never ran a marathon before. I guess Athens, the first Olympics, the first modern Olympics were in 1896, so just 8 years prior to this. So this was only the third Olympiad.
Right, yes. Uh-huh.
And I guess Greece was so proud that they were like, hey, we got to send somebody.
So they just...
Like, this is our event. Like, it started here. So they sent 10 people over to the United States who had never ran in a marathon before.
We need to represent, but it doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter where we place.
Just send people.
We just got to be there,
yeah.
Apparently.
Okay.
Also in the field were 2 men who were part of the South African World's Fair exhibit. They didn't come to run. They were here to be a part of the South African exhibit at the World's Fair. They were from the Swana tribe of South Africa. I hope I'm saying that correctly. They arrived at the starting line barefoot. They didn't wear shoes. They weren't wearing shoes.
As you do.
So they were ready. Allegedly. My favorite guy in this entire race is a gentleman, a Cuban national, and a former mailman by the name of Felix Carball. He was allegedly 5 foot tall, no taller. He raised money to come to the United States by running the length of the island of Cuba, like a fundraiser.
But like all of Cuba.
But like ran from one end of the island to the other.
Wow.
And he arrived in New Orleans just before the marathon was set to start, like a day or so before. He lost all of his money in a dice game. All the money he raised to get here and to get to St. Louis, right. He gambled away in New Orleans. He had to hitchhike to St. Louis to even participate in the race. He approached the starting line wearing no athletic clothing. He was wearing a long-sleeve shirt, long pants, a beret, and heavy street shoes.
Well, he lost his athletic clothing.
He might have gambled that away too,
and he couldn't.
This is all I have. I have a bag of clothes. I'll bet this, and it was craps, I think, and he lost everything. And a fellow Olympian apparently felt so bad that he approached the starting line wearing pants and a long-sleeve shirt that they found a pair of scissors for him, and they cut his pants at the knee so that it was, I guess, more feasible for him to run. And Mr. Carbajal also, allegedly, didn't eat 40 hours prior to the race. Almost 2 full days prior to the start of this marathon. He had not eaten.
Well, obviously, if you don't eat, you will weigh less.
You're lighter, yeah.
And therefore...
aerodynamics.
Yeah, you'll be able to run much faster.
That's science, son.
I
don't know what to tell you.
That's definitely...
I don't know what to tell you.
I've got him as the favorite.
Ooh. All right. Well, you're in for a surprise. Okay, so the race took place on August 30th. They started the race, bang, pistol in the air, at 3:03 p.m.
Right.
At the end of August.
Right.
The temperature was in the 90s. With humidity. Whatever the humidity in St. Louis is like, I don't know.
Not great. It's terrible.
Is it terrible?
Yeah, it's bad.
Is it as bad as it is here?
Missouri summer is...
Is it bad?
Yeah.
Because it's bad here.
Yeah.
But the total length of this race was only 24.85.
Okay. Well, so...
It cut him some slack, I guess.
Well, now we're closer to the 5-mile qualifier making sense. Just a little bit.
So your money is on Felix Carbajal to do great things.
Yeah, my man ran across Cuba, and he's light.
I mean, he's only 5 foot tall.
And he's 5 foot tall.
So he probably weighs like $120.
That's probably a negative, though, if he's 5 foot tall, like little T-Rex legs. Well, not T-Rex legs,
but
like T-Rex
He has a big head and little legs.
Yeah, that's not going to work.
Okay. Well, yeah, we'll see. One fair official called the course, quote, the most difficult a human being was ever asked to run over. Here's why. The runners ran 5 laps around the stadium that the race started in before they headed out. The race course was covered in inches of dust and dirt. So they didn't pick, like you imagine what you see today, they're running on like roads. Clean swept asphalt and it's all fairly flat. And no, they chose a course that was covered in like backcountry roads, and there were dust and dirt, and all this stuff was being kicked up in the runners' faces by the vehicles that were in front of them, pacing them. Right. Like marking the trail, essentially.
Right. But
they were following cars.
But they're kicking up dust.
But they were kicking,
cars. Yeah. Wow. Okay.
And remember when I said purposeful dehydration?
Yes.
That also comes into play.
All right.
So I read somewhere that there were 7 hills varying between 100 and 300 feet in elevation. Which 300 feet in elevation?
That's tall.
That's a tall hill.
That's tall.
And it was reported also that there was cracked stone across the roadway, and these were not ideal running conditions, which you would imagine. Not only was all of that wrong with the course, they also didn't close the course. There was no hey, you can't cross this street, there's runners coming. The runners had to dodge traffic, delivery wagons, railroad trains, trolley cars, and people walking their dogs.
So you're losing time if like Billy Bob down the road is just cruising by. You got to let him pass.
They probably ran the entire 26.2. They ran the extra mile and a half just dodging all this stuff on the road, on the course.
Just zigzagging.
Yeah, they're zigzagging around the course.
The community.
Yep. This was also a point of contention. The best case scenario that I found was that there were only 2 locations along the entire route to get water.
Oh my. So it's 90 degrees.
90 degrees, end of August, middle of the afternoon. And
2 water stations.
At best.
At best, there were 2
water stations. At best. I read somewhere that there was only 1, and I read that there may have been 0. But best case scenario that I found is there was a water tower at mile 6, and there was a roadside well at mile 12. And that was it.
And so even on best case, they're running the last 12.
They're running a half marathon with nothing to drink.
With nothing, just get
nothing.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
No water, no nothing.
Hey, that's science. Well, water weighs
heavy.
Down.
Isn't water like 8 pounds for a gallon or something? A gallon of water weighs 8 pounds?
Yeah, so that's not good.
Well, remember that 8 pounds number.
Well, this is the same time, too, that you don't let athletes drink water, right? Like, you're practicing outside and in the heat for football, and you just throw up and keep going. Like
basically,
no.
So apparently a common area of research at the time was dehydration in athletics. So the chief organizer of the games, James Sullivan, wanted to minimize fluid intake to test the limits and the effects of, quote, purposeful dehydration. So this was intentional because the chief organizer of the games was just curious to...
Somebody please dehydrate themselves so we can find out if this works.
Yeah. Essentially, yeah. They purposefully only gave them, at best, 2 water stations.
1900 science is the best.
1904 was miserable, apparently.
Yeah.
So the race starts. Pistol shoots. Fred Lors heads out front. This is the bricklayer.
Bricklayer. Big upper body.
Probably. Yeah. He's probably big, real big, strong guy.
Yeah.
He led the race early, but he dropped out after 9 miles. With severe cramping.
Well.
Imagine that.
Yeah, no water. Cramping. Seemed to go.
Imagine that. And he got a ride from one of the accompanying vehicles. Like, he gave up, and he got into a vehicle and began driving to the finish line. Okay?
He just wants fear of missing out. He just wants to be there.
Yeah, I guess he just wanted to see what he was going to miss out on. So he hops in this car, and apparently he is waving at spectators and the fellow runners that he passes in the car as he's going. This is important. Another man named William Garcia, who apparently worked as a lather. Like, that's a job.
Yeah. Lather.
Is it lather?
Lather. I think, yeah.
It's not a latherer. Like, he's not bathing people.
No, that would be... I hope he's not bathing people. They had door knockers. I don't think they had bathers.
Oh.
So, But a lather, yeah, I think lather.
Lather.
Yeah, like
it's some sort of construction.
Woodworking, yeah.
So that's what he did for a living. He nearly died. They found out later that he nearly died of hemorrhaging because all the dust from all the vehicles, it coated his esophagus and ripped his stomach lining.
Right.
So it almost killed him. He's not the only near death either.
That's some like Dust Bowl stuff.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, and then after that, John Lorden, he suffered a bout of vomiting and he gave up. He abandoned the race. This might be my favorite. One of the South African runners was chased a mile off of the course by wild dogs.
So just, okay.
He was running and came across some wild dogs, and they he ran from them and ran a mile off course.
But at this point, he's not marathon running either. Like he's
like sprinting,
running.
You can imagine, yeah,
feral dogs.
Yeah, he would be like for his life running away from these dogs. I found nothing that said he actually finished the race.
I'm sure not. Surely, at that point, man, if you're a mile off course, can you even find your way back?
Yeah, I don't know how he would
to be.
He might be in St. Louis still today.
Yeah, just wandering the woods.
I don't know. And then your boy Felix, he was Felix Carbajal. He was very friendly with the spectators. So he didn't speak very good English. He was from Cuba. So he was chatting with the spectators on the sides of the roadway in his broken English. He was trying to make conversation and stuff. He was being very friendly. At one point, he stopped at a car because he saw the occupants of the car eating. And of course, he hadn't eaten in a while.
Yeah.
They were eating peaches. So he asks for one. When he was refused, he playfully snatched 2 of them and ran away. Kept going. And he was eating the peaches as he was running.
Yeah.
Well, further along the course, he found an apple orchard. He stopped to have a snack. The apples he ate turned out to be rotten. And he suffered from stomach cramps. Imagine.
Yeah.
He laid down and took a nap.
Oh, yeah.
He laid down and fell asleep.
He read The Tortoise and the Hare as a child. And he knew what was going on.
He had it.
He saw that this was terrible from the start. And so he's going to rest.
Yeah. He probably wasn't going to make it without the nap. So
No.
It was probably his best case scenario. Sam Malore, who is now in the lead. Yeah, after all these people. Sam Malore is now in the lead. He also experienced severe cramping. He slowed to a walk and then eventually stopped also. Dropped out of the race. This leaves Thomas Hicks. Thomas Hicks was assisted by a support crew starting at about mile 10.
So he's got a plan.
Apparently. He had a team, 2 people at least.
He's done this before.
This was the amateur runner.
So he was
Thomas Hicks was the professional clown.
Right. This is
okay. He was a professional clown by trade, but he also finished second in Boston in 1904.
Right.
So
he had
4 months before this ish.
He knew what he was doing.
Probably.
And he's got all his clown friends.
He might be running with one.
They probably came in one course.
All 80 of them.
Apologies to all of our clown friends in the audience.
How rude. So Thomas Hicks was assisted by a support crew. He begged for a drink of water, but they refused to give him any, with the purposeful dehydration theme apparently.
Obviously. And
instead they just sponged his mouth out with warm distilled water instead.
So,
here, let's just coat your tongue and tease you a little bit.
Your body will think it's hydrated.
Yeah. It's a mental thing.
Yeah.
You'll be fine.
You'll be okay.
7 miles from the finish, so about, 17 miles in, this is when things got interesting.
This is when things got interesting. so
nothing that...
So we got one guy bleeding internally from dust.
Yep, hemorrhaging.
We have cramps because we don't drink water.
Everybody cramps.
We got a guy with stomach cramps because he ate some raw apples because he's just milling about and taking his time.
Yep.
And now we're going to get interesting.
Now we're getting interesting. So his team at this point, 7 miles away from the finish, his team at this point decided that now was the proper time to provide Thomas Hicks with a mixture of strychnine and egg whites. Strychnine is rat poison.
Okay, yeah.
And at the time, it was commonly used as a stimulant to the nervous system for athletes.
Yes.
They regularly took this concoction.
I just want to jump in. Because, number one, that's just bat crazy that we're going to give rat poison to anybody. But, I just can't stress enough that the 1900s were ridiculous. That's a time where, heroin would have been a medicine. Like, we're just going to mix some heroin with some alcohol and just give it to you.
Just give you some.
And it'll make you feel better. So, I'm not surprised by this idea, but it's just so... Rat poison and egg whites.
Rat poison and egg whites was the mixture that was being given to this gentleman.
Oh my goodness.
In the middle of a marathon.
Okay. Well, now he's my favorite to not win. Because he's going to die.
Okay. So, again, strychnine in small doses was commonly used at the time as a stimulant. And at the time, there were no rules about performance-enhancing drugs.
Of course. Everything was
in the Olympics. There just wasn't anything, there were no rules against it. But this turned out to be the first recorded instance of drug use in the modern Olympics.
Nice.
So shout out.
Yep.
Shout out to Thomas Hicks here. So, while Thomas Hicks is slowly dying, probably, Fred Lors miraculously recovers from his cramps. This is the gentleman who jumped in the car and was waving at people.
Yeah, he's in a car, yeah.
He jumps out of the car at around the 20-mile mark and starts running again.
Okay, so...
He's like, I'm fine.
There are no rules against performance-enhancing drugs, which I get.
Correct.
Because drugs in general were just legal. Like, you got cocaine in your soda. Yeah. Yep. But there has to be rules against driving in a car.
There were.
Okay, all right.
There were. But when he just jumped out of the car and started running, one of Thomas Hicks's support crew members allegedly yelled at him, like, hey, you can't do that. Get off the course.
Yeah.
And he just turned and kept running anyway. So Frederick Lors crosses the finish line in first place in just under 3 hours.
Okay.
Alice Roosevelt was at the finish line. Teddy's daughter?
Yeah.
Was waiting at the finish line. She was 20 at the time. And she had the honor of congratulating the winners. So she placed the wreath on Lors' head.
Because he finished first.
Because he came across the line first.
Yeah.
He accepts his wreath on his head, and that's the Olympic thing. She was about to put the gold medal around his neck when word got out at the finish line that he didn't run the entire course.
Right. Somebody had to have... Yeah. I was going to ask...
Somebody knew.
If there was anybody monitoring other than the competitors being like, what?
At some point, someone got to the finish line, word got around, and before the gold medal was provided, they said, hey, he cheated.
None of this.
Someone was quoted saying, someone called an indignant halt to the proceedings with the charge that Lors was an imposter.
Imposter.
Dun, dun, dun! That's the quote. Lors claimed at this point that he never intended to accept the honor of winning, and that he only finished as a, quote, joke.
I didn't mean to accept the honor of winning. I just was in the process of accepting.
I wasn't sure what I was doing. Like, I don't know why I was given all these cool things, but...
I didn't mean to win, but if they're going to let me win...
But they're going to give me the prize, then I'll take it. Okay. No, just kidding. It was a joke. So, Lors is disqualified. He is actually eventually banned from the sport.
Okay.
Short term. But at this point on the course, Thomas Hicks is still running. He heard that Lors was disqualified, and he was in bad shape at this point. He was suffering pretty badly.
The only liquid he's had is rat poison. Well, that's not even a liquid.
And egg whites.
Yeah.
So at this point, I guess his trainers thought it was a good idea to give him another dose of rat poison and egg whites and wash it down with brandy.
Oh, yeah. Because
here, swig this.
Alcohol and other substances is always the choice.
Don't listen to him.
If you're going to drink something, if you're going to take something, always wash it down.
Chase it with alcohol.
Yeah,
right?
Don't do that, kids.
Bad idea.
Don't do that, kids. Terrible. No. Stop.
Another quote from one of the race officials, Charles Lucas. Quote, over the last 2 miles of the road, Hicks was running mechanically like a well-oiled piece of machinery. His eyes were dull, lusterless. The ashen color of his face and skin had deepened. His arms appeared as weights, well tied down. He could scarcely lift his legs, while his knees were almost stiff.
Huh.
Essentially a zombie.
Right, but he's literally describing a machine, though. Like, his arms are down by his sides, so he's not even
there's no real full motion in his arms. He's not fully moving his legs.
He literally is like a tin man, just kind of like...
Yeah, just shuffling.
Shuffling to the finish.
Essentially.
Which makes sense, because they've twice dosed him with something that kills other animals.
And at this point, about 2 miles from the finish line, he started hallucinating and believed that he was still 20 miles away from the finish. At this point, he's begged to lay down and for something to eat, and then, of course, they didn't give it to him.
Yeah.
He was given more brandy and egg whites, no rat poison, though. And then, once he got to the finish line, he was being held up by his two trainers. So, like, imagine, like, an NBA player limping off the floor, can't walk, they're carrying him.
The flu game for Jordan.
Yeah. His legs were moving, not touching the ground, and he was carried across the finish line.
Across the finish. So, like, they didn't
He didn't
catch
finish
him
under
at
his
the
own
finish
power.
line. Okay, so that's a detail, right? Then that
he was crowned the winner.
So his team drug him across the finish line.
He was being held up by his trainers while his legs moved back and forth, not touching the ground, and he was crowned the winner.
So at that point, I mean, I get that it's not as
cheating?
far, but what's the difference between that and getting in a car? Like, you're not...
Is that cheating?
Yeah.
I mean, he was probably being assisted way farther back on the course,
Nobody
too.
saw it, yeah. Yeah, I don't think...
But they almost crowned a man who only ran, like, 13 of the 24 miles, too, so...
Which I get, because they didn't see
right.
the car escapade.
Sure.
But they did watch.
Well, they were probably like, well, we've already had one terrible, terrible thing happen here. Let's just get this over with. They probably, the people at the finish line probably don't even know about the wild dogs. They don't know about the apple orchard.
Yeah, they've not heard of any of this stuff.
They don't know about, they might not know about the hemorrhaging. Who knows? Like,
yeah.
They were just like, wow, we had one disaster.
We can't do it again.
We might not be able to do it. I don't know.
Wow.
I don't know.
Yeah, I would count that as cheating. I think that's not.
Well, he was crowned the winner. And he felt so bad that 4 doctors took an hour tending to him just for him to feel well enough to leave the grounds.
Right.
He lost 8 pounds during the course of the race. During the course of the race, he lost 8 pounds. And he was quoted, "Never in my life have I ran such a tough course. The terrific hills simply tear a man to pieces."
Well, I mean, yeah, 300 feet of elevation is 30 stories. Like, that is intense.
Yes. That's a lot of...
So he's right there.
Yes.
That is, it's on dirt.
But no mention of any of the other escapades that took place.
Yeah.
He was given rat poison twice, swigged some brandy while he was running, wouldn't let him eat, wouldn't let him drink water. But the hills will tear a man to pieces, though.
Yeah, the hills were the thing.
The hills
the hills were the trouble.
The hills tear a man to pieces. So the finishers included Thomas Hicks in first place.
Okay.
Albert Corey in second place, only 6 minutes behind.
Ah.
Arthur Newton, one of the professional runners, in third place. Your boy.
Yeah.
Mr. Felix.
Mr. Felix.
Finished fourth.
Hey, if he hadn't taken that nap.
He laid down and took a nap on the side of the road.
And finished fourth.
And finished in fourth place in this
He
race.
would have got a medal if they disqualify the guy that didn't actually finish.
He would.
I would be upset.
He would have gotten bronze. Man.
I would be upset if I had come all the way from Cuba and some dude got carried across the finish line.
Oh, yeah.
And I didn't get to get my medal.
That's true. Yeah. Maybe he should have been disqualified. So your boy could have taken something back home.
Yeah.
That sucks. And in fifth place was one of the Greek runners.
Who just showed up
Mm-hmm.
and went.
Yep.
Man.
What a disaster.
The craziest thing about this in my head is that knowing the way science operated then,
mm-hmm.
like there was some real science going on, like with like the way we think of it now. But somebody had to, that, all right, the guy that completely dehydrated himself, drank rat poison, and he finished first. So clearly this is...
Dehydration works.
The correct method.
Oh my god.
There's so much about that to like I don't know. You run it on dirt. You would never do that now.
No.
Because
Triathletes might like. There's some off-road triathlons and stuff. Like there's an
Sure.
Xterra series in Hawaii where they mountain bike.
Yes.
And then they trail run.
Yes.
I mean, so that's a thing.
But that's like it's not extreme sport. It's like
But in the
X Games.
Olympics?
But it is like an extreme test.
It's different.
It's on purpose to do that.
Yes.
But we know so much about like how if you run on a dirt surface, how much more energy it takes each stride because you're losing so much
You're slipping
in the dirt.
Yeah.
So you would never do that.
No.
You really wouldn't run barefoot now. I mean, I get the idea of running barefoot.
Some endurance people still swear by running barefoot.
Right.
But I mean, in an Olympics,
No.
in
right?
a sanction, I mean, and I say these people were professional runners, But in 1904,
right, nobody's a professional.
Are you really a professional runner? You don't really. I mean, are there endorsements?
No.
In 1904, like Nike's not paying you to run for them in 1904.
Right. Yeah.
Stuff like that is just non-existent then. Of course, hindsight is fantastic, especially in this case because strychnine is a hell of a drug.
It gets you to the finish line.
It stimulates the nervous system, so I understand why they would use it as a performance enhancer at the time because they probably didn't know as much about the side effects.
Maybe.
Would that have been the case? Like, is that why?
Yeah, it was a lot of strange things where, yeah, like I know the heroin thing is because it did. I mean, it's an opioid, so it does dull pain and it would make your symptoms lessen.
Sure.
Because they didn't know. Some doctors did, but most doctors, especially out in the country, they were unaware of like how disease works. So you felt this way. They gave you a thing to make you not feel this way anymore.
Sure.
So it works.
They're just treating symptoms, yeah.
So if it is something that stimulates the nervous system, they would have said you were tired.
This helped you.
This gave you energy.
Yeah.
This worked, which on some level is following the scientific method, but it's not quite getting to the root of the problem.
Right. Well, a lot of medications do that now.
Sure, that's still the idea.
People take stuff all the time just to deal with the symptoms of something and not actually the cause. So, I mean, it happens all the time now. And then maybe in 116 years we'll realize that, like, hey, oxycodone was a terrible thing.
Well, yeah, because we're doing that now. Right? There's clearly other painkillers. What are we doing?
Well, there was probably plenty of people in 1904 that just refused to take rat poison too. But
yes, well, yeah.
Before the competitive advantage, if this was the first, I don't know how long it was taken before this, but this was the first documented case of PEDs in the Olympics.
Right.
And it happened until, well, I mean, it's probably still happening. Let's be real.
Obviously.
The IOC didn't actually ban the use of PEDs until 1967.
So so anything was still legal through the 60s.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Up until 67. So the mid-60s is when sports federations were like, hey, this might not be the best for competition purposes.
Which is a bigger question and topic, kind of, because, you know, in the sports that are the most popular in America, obviously there's problems with that still. Mm-hmm. But it's kind of selective about which sports and which things are the issue. Like steroids in baseball is like, oh gosh, no.
We can't do that, but
you hear about every once in a while an NFL player will get popped. Now they don't quite tell you what the substance is, but there was a time where, like, I think Sean Merriman,
he was big into the roids.
Yeah, the Barry Bonds stuff was going on in baseball, and everybody was having an uproar. And then Sean Merriman was suspended 4 games.
He's like, watch this,
and everybody's like, okay. And it's just like how we think of, because there's 2 camps, right? There's the one that says this is unfair, you can't do it, and then there's the one that says that just do whatever is still fair competition if everybody's doing it.
Does that come from the sports themselves, or does that come from the fan bases of the sports? Because of course baseball people are very traditionalist.
Yeah. So
you would think like, oh, anything to gain an advantage shouldn't be like corking bats and the resin and
and the Astros cheating to win a World Series.
Stay tuned for our next episode. Just kidding. But I mean, it happens all the time in baseball. But of course, the roids thing was a huge thing because so many people got caught, and not all of them admitted.
Yeah.
To like, oh yeah, it was me. But like, I mean, it happened. Of course, drug use happens everywhere, and we won't spoil all of our future episodes for you because we want this to be part of a cheating series. So maybe we do PEDs in another sport later. But it's interesting that baseball had such an issue with steroid, and of course, there's outrage over the Astros, and like they're probably going to fight everybody at every stadium they go to this year.
They deserve it
because they robbed a lot of people of everything that they ever wanted to get out of a sport.
Yeah,
was a championship.
Yeah,
and they cheated to get there.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a fan base thing, and it's like a perception thing too, right? Because steroids are bad, but baseball people as traditionalists, so Bonds is wrong because he took steroids to break Henry Aaron's record. Yeah. Well, we don't know. We know when Aaron was playing, players were taking amphetamines for energy. Playing every day, you're tired.
Yeah, sure.
You just pop. They call them like greenies or whatever. You just
Mhm.
pop one. You feel great. You play the game. Those are outlawed now. And
But his
I don't
record
know that
stands.
Aaron was taking them, but there were players of that time period whose records are falling that did take them, and that doesn't get as much of a stigma
Nobody cares.
because I don't know. It's just not the thing that's happening now. So PEDs are definitely just a weird thing, and it shows because everybody knows or everybody assumes that this rat poison stuff is going to stimulate your system.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to give you an advantage, and everybody's just okay with it. So at least for a little while, everybody was in the science camp of yes, this will help you do it.
Yeah,
and it is still selective, right? You can have those energy bars, running, right? That's still legal.
Yeah, they eat while they run.
And,
Our endurance athletes can eat if they need to.
So it is just kind of a arbitrary line of what is this is
What's
allowed to be helpful,
performance enhancing, and what's not,
right?
or
which
what's
is,
I mean, water might be performance enhancing.
right?
It might have helped a lot of people in 1904 this race.
Yeah, plenty more people can finish.
But where's the line, and like what's illegal and what's not?
Yeah.
So along with that, I found a passage on the internet basically outlining why the 60s were the cutting off point for PEDs. So during the early 20th century, many Olympic athletes discovered ways to improve their athletic abilities by boosting testosterone. As their methods became more extreme, it became increasingly evident that the use of PEDs was not only a threat to the integrity of sport, but could also have potential fatal side effects on the athlete. The only Olympic death linked to athletic drug use occurred in the Rome Games in 1960. During a cycling road race, a Danish cycler fell from his bicycle and later died. A coroner inquiry found that he was under the influence of amphetamine, which caused him to lose consciousness during the race. So he was essentially riding, lost consciousness because he was so doped up, and just fell. Probably hit his head, and
that was it.
And that was it for him. So by the mid-60s, sports federations starting to ban the use of PEDs, and then the IOC formally followed suit in 67.
So it's more of so we had somebody die.
More of an athlete safety thing,
yeah,
it seems like, than... people were raising the idea of, hey, this might be bad for competition. But ultimately, hey, these drugs are killing athletes. Well, killed an Olympic athlete, and then the outrage came to fruition.
Which makes sense because now that's part of the competitive process is to just do that little bit more, If this helps me, then this little bit more is going to help me even more. And you do push to the limit there, and if you go over the edge, and that part makes sense.
Sure,
for why
I can see that.
Yeah,
but so not only are the use of PEDs in question, especially in this case, how about the guy who jumped in the car and almost won the freaking thing?
Yeah,
he hopped in a car. He rode in the car for 11 miles, only ran 13 of it.
Yeah, and they were ready to let him win until somebody else said something. Yeah. And that's maybe the first time it happened, but it didn't the last time.
No. So there's a really iconic story about a woman named Rosie Ruiz. I'm not going to spare you all the details, but she ran in the 1979 New York City Marathon, allegedly hopped on the subway.
Yeah.
And I think that was the story. She hopped on the subway. Well, that race time qualified her for the 1980 Boston Marathon because you have to qualify to get into that. Well, then she also cheated during the Boston Marathon, and it was only a week after Boston when the New York City officials started thinking, like, wait a minute, I don't know, like they started looking at her splits and stuff. And in one of the two races, I can't remember, she ran the second half of the marathon, like, at a world record pace. She ran the first half in, like, 2 hours, and the second half in less than an hour.
Just getting it.
And that was suspect, of course. So they disqualified her from New York City. That did not automatically disqualify her from the Boston finish, but Boston eventually opened their own investigation and was like, hey, no, same kind of deal. Why are your splits so high? I think it was in Boston. She only ran the last half mile of the race.
Yeah. She
snuck into the crowd off the start, got her right all the way to the finish, and then just popped out. And it was like two Harvard students who were there to watch the race who was like, hey, I saw her on the subway or something like that.
Yeah, she clearly was not
clearly was not running this race. So, but that's one of the more, and there are actually some interesting more recent ones, some amateur. There's a lot of amateurs who try and cheat the system, but the professional ones are the most profound because you're supposed to have athletic integrity and you're supposed to be doing this for just to test your limits kind of thing, and you're willing to cheat just to win, which is obnoxious. But so that's one of the more interesting, and there's a lot to that, like the details of the investigation and stuff that we could go into later. But that's probably the most famous one where she hopped on the subway in New York.
And then went on.
And there was like one of the doctors, one of the physicians, I think, who was supposed to be at like the first aid station at the finish line. They had a conversation on the subway or something. And then Rosie walks in and she's like, "Oh, I claim to be a hurt runner. I finished just a minute ago. Help me," or something like that.
To try and avoid
like jumping out and crossing the finish line like you're supposed to. But she got a time registered that qualified her for the next race.
And I'm sure people still do, like amateurs. I'm sure they still do this, where you're running like a 5K, 10K, something like that. You've got those chips that track you. But if you go around the first corner or whatever where there's nobody else, you just snip off your chip, hand it to a friend. They go off. You run the same time they do. Their chip gets snipped and kept, and then they just kind of pull out of their pocket and throw something. You can still.
There's actually a website like marathoncheaters.com or something that like it's that sole person's job essentially. It's like a full-time job for that person, and that's all they do is just out people who cheat in these amateur races. There's tons of evidence of it, but one of the bigger professional one is the Rosie Ruiz story. Yes.
I just still can't get over my man that did not finish under his own power. And somehow that was
crowned the champion.
Okay, that's the part that sticks in my head, because even I guess they felt bad for him, and so it was okay. But even if
just let it go, even
if PEDs are okay, I would think that is still like, hey, that's cheating.
It would be, yeah. I mean, because there's an iconic video of, it was big race. It was a professional runner who ended up, recently, who was crawling across the finish line. Yeah. Like, fell. His legs gave out, like, in the final stretch. I don't know who it was, forgive me, but his legs just gave out inside of the finish line, and he crawled on his hands and knees to cross it on his own power.
Right, that's
what you're supposed to do, I would imagine.
And I guess sometimes cheaters do win.
Moral of the story, folks.
Usually cheaters never win. That's what we say at Carolina Hurricanes games.
Cheaters.
Cheaters never. Yeah, but here in this case, I think a cheater did win.
A fun parting fact: Thomas Hicks and Fred Loers would both run in the next Boston Marathon against each other. Yeah. You want to guess who won?
I'm going.
One of the two of them won.
Yes.
Which
Hicks won. No.
So neither of them were professionals.
Loers is winning.
You think so?
Yeah.
Well, that's right.
Yeah.
He won. And apparently won fair and square, run the whole race. Everything was there was no controversy, But the atmosphere of this Olympics just blossomed all sorts of ridiculousness. What a story.
Incredible. Thank you for listening to this episode of What You Don't Know About Sports. If you enjoyed what you heard today, please leave us a review, 5 stars only, and hit that subscribe button wherever you listen. If you have a great sports story, we want to hear about it. You can connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at WYDKAS Podcast, and on our YouTube channel at What You Don't Know About Sports Podcast. All episodes are written, recorded, and edited by us. Stay tuned for the next episode. All episodes are written, recorded, and edited by us. Stay tuned for the next episode.
Stay tuned.
My goodness, I am terrible right now. All right. If you have a great sports story, we want to hear about it. You can connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, and our Twitter at Y.
You need to do like the singer's warm up where they're like
Say some tongue twisters and be done. I straight up looked at a W and said Y. If you have a great sports story, we want to hear about that. You can connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at WYDKS. Thank you for listening to this episode of What You Don't Know About Sports. If you enjoyed what you heard today, please leave us... God, my goodness. What is wrong with me?
Words are hard, man.
I know the English language.